Rebecca to officially kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you, Lily. Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll let people keep wandering in as we do a quick introduction. My name is Rebecca McNulty. I'm an instructional designer at the University of Central Florida. I'm excited to welcome you to our panel discussion featuring the UNSG Open Pedagogy Faculty Fellowship. And I'm joined by my colleague, Lily Dubach, who I'll let introduce herself quickly before I kick us off.
Hello, everyone. I will also be asking questions for our amazing panel. I am the textbook affordability librarian at the University of Central Florida. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Lily. So we're excited to have you here for today's panel. We'll be talking with the UCF faculty who participated in the UNSG Open Pedagogy Faculty Fellowship this last year, an international initiative that helps educators integrate the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into their teaching through open pedagogy and open educational resources. This fellowship has connected faculty across institutions for years, and UCF was proud to take part for the first time in 2024. Our faculty worked with interdisciplinary international partners to design renewable assignments that engage students with real-world global challenges. It's been an incredible opportunity to rethink learning in a way that emphasizes collaboration, sustainability, and impact. So today we'll hear directly from our fellows for their experiences and also from Shinta Hernandez, the fellowship coordinator and leader and founder. So if we want to dive right in, Shinta, could you introduce yourself and give us a brief overview of the fellowship, please? And then we'll move on to our panelists.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this amazing opportunity. And I want to first thank Rebecca and Lily, who are on the leadership team of this fellowship work. And I also want to thank Kevin Corcoran, who's in the audience, who we've worked on a number of different things over the years. And so it's been so wonderful having him and his group here be a part of this faculty fellowship. And so just really quickly, my name is Shinta Hernandez. I am the Dean of MC Online and Academic Support at Montgomery College. We are located in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is just right outside of Washington, D.C. And we are the largest community college in the state of Maryland. And we were recognized recently as the most diverse community college in the continental United States, which makes an opportunity like this fellowship on United Nations Sustainable Development Goals even more worth it for our faculty as well as our students. So I'll stop there as far as my introductions and hand it over back to Rebecca and Lily.
Excellent. Thank you, Shinta. So now I'm going to ask our other panelists the same question. So starting with Barry, and then we'll go to Devin, then Martha, then Sharon. Please introduce yourself quickly and let us know what motivated you to participate in the fellowship. Go ahead, Barry.
Okay, Barry Maurer, Associate Professor of English at UCF. And the straight answer is that you and Rebecca asked me to. And I don't say no to you guys. So, but beyond that, I've been interested in open educational resources and sustainability for a long time. So it really was kind of an intersection of my interests. I was curious to see how this program was structured, and it was very surprising when I was paired with a biologist, and I'll talk about that later. So, and how we work that out. Thanks.
Thanks, Barry. All right, Devin, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more.
Sure. My name is Devin Cadwell-Zada, and I'm an associate lecturer in interdisciplinary studies, also at the University of Central Florida. And this was kind of an extension of a CDL grant that we've been working on. Sharon and Martha and I have been developing an open educational resource for use by faculty around the world. And Martha and I are creating Canvas modules that can be imported with assignments and things like that. And this was just a great opportunity to work with someone from outside of the university and coordinate with her. She used the assignments that we developed together for lower level reading students and writing students, whereas I used mine for upper level interdisciplinary communications students. So it was really interesting to see how to take the same assignment we both worked on and then adapt it.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. All right, Martha.
Hi all, my name's Martha Huberts. I'm an instructor at UCF as well. So there is a theme here, it seems, except for Shinta. So I participated in the UCF ASU kind of collab on partnering with sustainability outside your field. And, you know, I've been working on this OER project as part of an iLab initiative. And it just kind of naturally segued into, you know, this kind of partnering up with a faculty member, in my case from Langara, which is in Canada. And Megan was kinesiology, so very much like you. I was partnered with somebody whose discipline was extremely different from mine. Fortunately, we have very similar pedagogical attitudes, so it was an easy kind of meeting of the minds. We used them in completely different classes, and it was marching to the beat of very different drums, but the overlap really seemed to work for students in both schools. And what was really nice, not only did Megan and I work well together, but Lily, I believe you worked with your counterpart at Langara as well, kind of, you know, sharing resources on how to create an OER kind of repository for students. So that was kind of cool too, like a multi-level sharing, if you will.
Yeah, definitely a very cool process. Okay, and finally, Sharon, please introduce yourself quickly and share what motivated you to be part of this.
Great, thank you for this opportunity. Yes, my name is Sharon Woodle, and I am also an associate lecturer in interdisciplinary studies. And as Devin pointed out, this is part of my colleague and I were working on a press books with the explicit intention of on sustainability, with the explicit intention of making this a resource that's publicly available for all to use. And that, coupled with the fact that gender in the environment has been part of my research agenda since my not since my master's degree. And I've been doing a lot of work in feminist science studies, particularly around environmental sciences. And so this all sort of came together when this opportunity arose. It checked all of the boxes of all the things that I like to do and am already currently doing, with the added advantage of getting to meet people from lots of different perspectives who are also working on the same things. So when the opportunity presented itself, I jumped on board, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Now, as a follow-up to that question, we'll go around to our panelists, or UCF panelists again. How did you decide which course you were going to deploy your renewable assignment this fall? So in the summer when you were designing, I know many of us teach many different varieties of courses. How did you just pick the one that you were going to use? And we can maybe start with Sharon for that, go reverse order.
Well, mine was actually pretty easy because I had two courses, gender and the environment, and the other course is on diversity, leadership, and environmental studies. So it was a no-brainer, actually. I had one each semester, so I put it into the environmental studies. And it actually, I had a specific U.S. development goal in mind that I was going to delve into, but it ended up that I had a lot of students with a lot of different backgrounds who wanted to study a variety of different aspects of that. So I ended up allowing them to choose which development goal they wanted to address. So I ended up working a little bit backwards, which ended up changing a few things as I went along. But yeah, the subject matter of the course lent itself ideally for this assignment.
Thank you.
So Megan and I developed 3 different assignments that would work for both psychology as well as kinesiology, which was not an easy feat, but it also shows, I think, that good pedagogical design and good assignment design transcends area, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're teaching, a well thought out assignment should be able to be modified to fit different types of classes. So I ran with we had students create a digital story. In my case, I use Sway because UCF has that available for students for free. And then we shared through the Library Star system. So this was no cost to students across the board. Megan went with one of the other assignments we developed that was looking more at AI literacy and incorporating it that way. And then I believe this semester I'm doing the discussion assignment we created, and she's doing this way. So we're kind of round robining between the three in different classes. And I went with my service learning courses because that is where I have the reflection component. So I did a LinkedIn learning certificate on how to develop a SWAY. So checking the NACE box. Then I have them create the SWAY, and then they could share it in STARS and share it with their partner agency. So again, kind of checking a couple NACE boxes as well as SDG boxes as well as OER boxes. So yay, yay team.
Wonderful, thank you. And Devin?
Well, I decided to use it in my interdisciplinary communications course. It's a 4,000 level course, and I have students from all different disciplines in there. I have computer science, I have some engineering, I have, quite a wide variety of students. And I wanted to choose a course like that because I gave them an option. I asked them in the end to develop a social media campaign that would support one of two different outcomes, basically. Well, SDG 16, which was peace, justice, and social strong institutions, and then or 14, which is life below the water. And giving them that sense of agency was really important in that course because they were all a little like, how can we apply this to what we are doing in computer science or in engineering or but most of them are already out there in that social media world, and to have the opportunity to apply multiple perspectives and interdisciplinary communication practices to one of these SDGs that just was something that resonated with them, made perfect sense. And really, I just saw such a high level of engagement with them that made me feel good. I learned a lot from them, asking them to do this. So that's the course I targeted, and I keep using it and adjusting it and tweaking it, which is kind of a fun part of this.
Awesome, thank you. And Barry?
Yeah, I was only teaching 2 courses, and one was research and writing about literature, which is pretty focused on that. And so I didn't want to add something that was way outside. The other one is literary theory, which is also pretty focused, but theory is very broad and includes, some of the theories come from medicine, like we use Freudian and psychoanalytic theory. And so I figured this is a place to, intersect with the UN goals. And I worked with the biologist at Kamloops, was interested in environmental impacts on mental health. And I thought, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to, because environment can include things like, exposure to chemicals and social interactions and sleep and exercise. And beyond the fact that students themselves have all sorts of problems with sleep and exercise and all that, and that impacts their mental health. We're looking very broadly beyond this. And so the one environmental factor I thought we could work on is language exposure, particularly with children of a very young age. If they don't have adequate language exposure, the language learning parts of their brain atrophy. And we luckily already had a reading we were doing in the class that was assigned about the strange case of Victor, the wild boy of Avignon. So anyway, he was discovered around the beginning of the 1800s, and he'd been living in the woods and he had no language. And this Dr. Itard tried to teach him how to speak and use language. and he had only limited success. And the reason was that he didn't understand, scientists didn't know at the time that the brain has a window of learning, right? So I asked my students to say, what has happened in the science in the last 200 years to explain the environmental effects of language on mental health and psychological development, and look for peer-reviewed stuff. And so that's what they did. And the idea was to read through peer-reviewed material, much of it behind paywalls, but we could access it through the university system. But then we could sort of translate it into ordinary language and use it for disseminating to people who maybe don't have that access. So that was our approach.
That's a great segue to a question I have for our faculty fellows before we then move on to another question for Shinta. So my question is just kind of, what else do you want to share about the assignment you created collaboratively, so that kind of our audience can understand, okay, what were you asking the students to do, and then what did it look like? So I'll turn it back to Barry if you want to add a little more context, and then we'll go back through.
Sure, yeah. So as I mentioned, that a lot of the work we were doing was to make this material accessible, since really the UN goals are aimed in a lot of areas that are, don't have educational resources or don't have the same kind of literacy. So sometimes that meant taking a lot of terminology in the scientific papers and just trying to make it more accessible to people, kind of put it in ordinary language. My own students had a lot of trouble, since they're not scientists, they're mostly English majors, and they also didn't know how to necessarily, I'd say the biggest obstacle for them is they're reading scientific papers, but they don't know how to read the statistical parts. And my response to them was, don't worry about it. Skip that and read the conclusion, because you don't need to be an expert in statistics to really grasp the main points of these papers. That's something you can learn later. We can't possibly learn that in this class.
True.
So yeah, so sometimes you just have to work with the limitations you've got.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Barry. Okay, to Devin, any other aspects you want to share about the assignment?
Well, I think that designing it for both remedial level students and 4,000 level students was an interesting challenge, because I worked with a faculty member in Maryland, so she was not too far away, but she taught all remedial students, so she had different challenges to address in terms of what are your outcomes. And we focused a lot on student learning outcomes for the course itself. And we both decided to use our assignments for final projects rather than incorporating them as one of many. And so that final project, it made it a lot easier, because you look at your learning outcomes and align the assignment and the instructions and the expectations and the rubric with those learning outcomes. And for her, it meant taking out a couple of steps, but they didn't impact the students' involvement with understanding the SDGs and creating the social media campaign. Whether they wanted to share it publicly or not was their option. But really, I think that looking at course outcomes, if you choose to use something as a final project, was the key to making this successful for both of us.
Thank you, definitely. Martha, anything else you want to add about the assignment itself?
Sure. Although, Barry, yours sounds incredible, and I absolutely love Achard's work. And being a Piagetian, it's a really nice piece. So I love that you're giving that to students and having them think critically about it. In our case, probably the biggest challenge for us was not just one of us is kinesiology and the other one's psych. It was you know, my students are a little different from Megan's. So my online courses tend to be around 70 to 75% transfer students, around 25 to 30% first gen. Most of the students in my classes check at least 2 boxes for being FAFSA eligible plus a transfer, or first gen plus does transfer, or some combo of these things. So things can be more challenging, right? Even though they were taking upper division courses with me, it may not really necessarily be students who have that background compared to our first time in college students. Megan's students tended to be more traditional, although she as well, just because of where Langara is located, had some of these same types of concerns for her students. So we focused more on, and both of us are really big proponents of NACE competencies, which worked really well because both of us are like, let's lay, you know, down, you know, some of these kind of soft job skills, things that they can show employers, things that help with critical thinking, but are not overly challenging. So the SWAY is a high stakes assignment and the other two were low stakes. So we mixed those up so that they would be able to be scaffolded differently. And again, I see someone keeps mentioning the LinkedIn Learning courses. Again, for me, this was just super easy. So for this, I have them do two, one on how to create a SWAY and one on, you know, the SDG course. So, but again, I recognize we're fortunate enough at UCF where we pay for that. Megan's students did not have access to that. So instead, we found kind of free resources that covered some of the same material that she could give to her students to kind of scaffold background.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing additional details on that. And now to Sharon, anything else you'd like to share about the assignment?
Sure. So my colleague and I, we created 3 assignments, and the idea behind this was that each of the assignments could be used individually as standalone, or they could be used together as a course project, and that's how I utilize them. And one of the things that was my course in particular is a designated a high impact practice course for global learning. And so I really wanted to make sure that in our assignments, we were able to link both the global perspective, but also with the local perspective. And so the 3 assignments start with getting them first to sort of map out the terrain and to build a conceptual map that identifies some of the key concepts related to whatever SDG that they have decided to investigate. The second one gets them to go a little bit deeper and build a little bit more theoretical framework and add some contextualizations around it. And then the third assignment asks them to take that information that they have gathered and interview community stakeholders so that they could identify the ways in which this issue is relevant to their own communities and propose some ideas of how they could address it. So I had a fairly big, well, big for me, 35 students. So I had lots of opportunity to see how this assignment would be work both individually and as a course project. But my colleague ended up not being able to teach the course that she had planned, and so she only had one independent student. So the fact that we had this flexibility built into the assignment was ideal, and this turn of events allowed us to actually put it to the test. And so I think retrospectively, there are definitely some adjustments I'm going to make when I teach this course again and use the same assignments. And some of the feedback teaching it in a one-on-one situation with in a independent research context is another whole ball game. So both of our reflections together have allowed us to make some adjustments to the assignments that I think will be beneficial for whomever, if anybody utilizes them after us. So yeah, thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Shinta, based on your experience with the fellowship, are there any other types of assignments that we didn't discuss just now that you would like to maybe highlight for our audience?
Well, I appreciate that question, Rebecca. And first of all, let me just say how excited I am to hear all of our faculty fellows in this space talk about what they did through the fellowship and just the student projects and impact that's going to come out of it. And just, it's been so innovative to hear to see all of this evolve. But in terms of types of assignments that I think could be, in addition to what everybody's already said, one very popular way to do these assignments that we have found through our fellows is a scaffolding type of assignment, just kind of from a formatting perspective. And so it's scaffolding, one of the requirements of the fellowship for the audience in this space is there's the requirement is that faculty fellows have to develop 3 renewable assignments. And these 3 renewable assignments can be either 3 separate assignments or 3 scaffolding connected assignments. What we have found is that the scaffolding is really popular among our fellows, but also among our students. Because as you can imagine, when you scaffold an assignment and say part 1, part 2, part 3, the students can see, especially when you articulate it, the students can see the connections between the first to the second to the third assignment. And that in and of itself is a wonderful learning experience for our students. And it's been a wonderful learning experience for the faculty fellows too, to think about how can you in this fellowship space come up with 3 assignments that can be connected together. So that's one thing that I think could be added to the discussion. But kind of what already everybody has said, the other one that is really a highlight in terms of types of assignments is when the fellows are able to make some of the UN SDGs overlap with one another. So if you're familiar with the SDGs, there's 17 of them, and when you look at so many already overlap. And so when a student can say or can see that goal 1 and goal 3 and goal 5 are all connected to each other, it is again conveying the message that the world is interconnected and the problems that the world faces are also interconnected. And so the solutions can also be something that we come together in a comprehensive way to tackle. And so when I talk about this interconnection and assignments, it really goes back to the criteria of the fellowship itself, which is, many of you have already alluded to, that faculty fellows are working across different institutions and across multiple disciplines. And that has been such an important piece of this fellowship, because just as we've talked about, the problems that we face are interconnected, and the solutions can come from multiple perspectives and angles. And so when our students can see that here they are in a biology class, for example, but they've got an assignment that has biology incorporated with sociology and maybe incorporated with another discipline, they look at problem solving in a much different light. And so it's those types of assignments that I think really hit home for our students and probably have the greatest impact in their own learning process. So thank you for that question, Rebecca.
That's amazing to hear. Really, really good, Shinta. Thank you so much. So in order for these assignments to be possible, the fellows had to collaborate with faculty member from another institution and a different discipline, right? And I'm curious, I'm going to probably start with Barry again. How did this change the way you think about your discipline-specific pedagogy?
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty wildly different because the other faculty member, as I mentioned, is in biology, and particularly like neurobiology, and I'm in English literature. I mean, there is overlap, and I make it kind of a side study of mine to study psychology. So, and then also we're both interested in environment. So the question of environment was really a common feature. And environment, we tend to think of environment as just being nature, right? But environment includes everything, including, what we do, the chemicals we introduce in the environment, food and water, social experiences, architecture. So really thinking about environment in a broad way is kind of it's a great way to bring disciplines together, because every discipline relates in some way to environment, if you define it that way. So also, health and wellness was our UN sustainability goal, and again, if we're just looking at literature, that may or may not be the focus of a particular work of literature. Maybe like, I can think of The Yellow Wallpaper off the top of my head as an example. But more broadly, the question of how significant language is, not just to communication, but to our very health itself. And one of the things in the literature that immediately becomes apparent is that people who are lacking language skills, and I do want to take just a second here to point out that the average American adult has a 5th grade or worse reading level, that actually leads to terrible psychological outcomes, from fear and, raging and there's all this antisocial behavior and all kinds of things. And we can literally see it in this country right now and for the past many, many years. It's also not just, when we talk about sustainability, we shouldn't just think about, Burundi or someplace. It's right here that we need this development. So.
Thank you for sharing, Barry. Definitely important things to think about. To Devin. So again, the question is, you had to collaborate with a faculty member from a different institution, different discipline. How did this change the way you think about your discipline-specific pedagogy?
Well, my students tend to come from a lot of different disciplines. And so teaching interdisciplinary studies is helping them to see issues that are complicated from a lot of different perspectives, instead of from just their own viewpoint or their own one disciplinary view. So this really did give me more of an opportunity to look at what I was teaching from that same angle with different perspectives, because my partner's students were, Barbara's students were more remedial, needing maybe just this more foundational approach to rhetorical context and not a lot of the other things that we were, branching into in interdisciplinary communication. But it also made me realize there were students in my own classes who were taking, 4,000 level, who had no idea. They may have passed 1101 and 1102, which were, the basic requirements for the course, but they don't remember and they don't actively apply. What is my purpose? Who am I talking to? What is my message? Where, it's a very fundamental concept that she was teaching, and she wanted to have more information on how I have taught it in the past. So it gave me the opportunity to share with her course content, and then also for her to share with me the fact that sometimes we assume our students, because they may have had those prerequisites, have put all that into practice in their daily communication oriented lives, when in fact it might just get filed away in the back of their mind or completely forgotten. So that was an important aspect of this experience for me, was don't take it for granted that this fundamental communication practice is there. Go back and work with them on it and make sure that they're understanding all of the elements that are coming into play with creating whatever they're going to write.
I love how your collaboration with the other faculty member from another institution led to sharing of course content and led to greater student success in that way, to make things more accessible and understandable for all students. That's excellent. Thank you for sharing. To Martha.
Yeah, so again, Megan and I, it sounds like our pairing was very similar to Barry and his partners. So fortunately, even though Megan's kinesiology, she has a great interest in psychology and kind of incorporates that into her classes to keep students engaged. And so we were able to kind of find where we intersect and go from there. We went with a very broad SDG 10 rather than getting into nitty gritty, because that was something where we could really work on it with in a healthcare kind of course, as well as in my psychology courses, and that we wouldn't have issues kind of trying to plug it in without it being awkward. The large assignment, we did incorporate scaffolding. The low stakes assignments, we did not. So we decided to kind of go these different approaches. And part of that is how we teach our courses. And we didn't want something that could be used only in one course. We wanted to design mindful assignments that could be used with my class of 175 or her class of 20, that it could be upper division, lower division, you would be able to modify the assignments easily and plug and play. So that's kind of what we tried to create, and I think it is what we created, although I could be wrong.
Thank you for sharing, Martha. Okay, Sharon.
Thank you. So I worked with a colleague in psychology, and I am actually in interdisciplinary studies. So interdisciplinarity is my discipline. So it was kind of a different way to think about this, because I focus on what the processes of knowledge work are. The real challenge actually came from the fact that it wasn't the fact that she was in psychology, because I think that the approaches that both of us had was very simpatico, and we were both on board with the flexibility. But the real challenge was that she's in a community college and just was not sure what her class assignment was going to be. And so she thought it was going to be this course, and then she thought it was going to be this course, and then it wasn't that. And so just that uncertainty actually helped us in a way, because it just so forced us every single time to make sure that whatever we were doing, however we were building the assignments, that they were going to be easily adaptable to any one of these contexts. So initially I thought that was going to be a little bit frustrating, but actually I think it in the end tended to help us create a better assignments, just because of that level of adaptability. So, and my dogs are barking at somebody out front, the Amazon truck.
Thank you. When we're going back through the faculty fellows, Sharon, we can start with you again. How did your students respond to working on these SDG related projects?
To be honest, I don't really know. I don't really know, because I don't really know that they realized that they were working on these sustainable. I mean, I put all the information in there, and I had several really good projects that I wanted to share, and so I would reach out, and then it was like cricket. So be honest, I felt like I was yelling into the void. So if I had to be honest and do some reflection going back into this again, I need to find, I think, another way to make it more clear what exactly they were doing and why. I mean, they knew why they were doing it in context of the overall course, but I'm not sure which ones of them really grasped the notion that this was part of a sort of a project within a course type of thing. So, I mean, like I said, I would probably need to make that somehow more clear. I'm not sure. Put it into assignment that's graded, so I know that they actually read it, for example. But
Sure. Devin?
Sure. I actually kind of did the opposite of Sharon. I made it very clear on the syllabus that they would be using the UN's SDGs as the basis for their work in learning and then demonstrating their abilities in interdisciplinary communications. I included examples of things like Nike ads that were talking about gender or about, where they come from, being a disability, things like that. We started early in the course with basically I did scaffold things, and the one that I used and I was talking about was the final project. I used a discussion post where we talked about visual rhetoric, and I asked them to find some sort of image and post it in the discussion and explain what the main point was, where the source was, what their credibility was, who they felt the audience was for this image. And that was just fascinating to me, because I used the same SDGs, which was peace, justice, and strong institutions, or life below the water. Specifically with life below the water, because we're in Florida, it was important for students to narrow that. And I did the first target, which was reducing marine pollution. And the students just grabbed onto it and interacted more in that discussion than think I've seen in any class in the 17 years I've been teaching. They one image that stood out in my mind was a student found went to surfrider.org and found an image of a jellyfish floating in the water, but when you look more closely at it, it's actually a grocery sack, a brown grocery sack that's full of water and floating up, and the handles are coming down. And it was talking about our own responsibility in not contributing to marine pollution and not using reusable shopping bags. And students would interact about the image. They would talk about, well, that would relate to this or relate to that, and I was just fascinated by it. There were pictures of sushi that were actually made with plastic. The fish had plastic in them. Just really interesting. And, they had to cite their sources and do all that, but it led up to our final project. So my students responded positively. And I think it motivated students who chose that SDG to go out and do beach cleanups, which I required them to do community service work based on whichever SDG they had chosen. Other students who did the peace, justice, and strong institutions, we focused it on cybersecurity, and they went more into being safer online themselves and helping their friends, family, and others to also be safer with changing passwords, asking about protecting student data at the university level, several different things that they were doing. So the response was positive. I also had a before and after survey for them because I wanted to know, did you know anything about these SDGs before the class? Yes or no? And then how, where would you rank your understanding of them now? And I would say probably 90%, since I've been doing this, had said they had no understanding or awareness of it beforehand, and 100% had it afterwards.
Wonderful. Thank you. Martha?
Yeah, so for, again, Megan and I really took a broad approach. So we wanted to really design materials that could serve multiple disciplines in a really authentic manner rather than a superficial one, so that faculty could easily modify depending on the area they taught in. And in this way, it would easily fit her kinesiology and my psych, but also for the purpose of the OER fellowship, that it was something that other faculty, no matter what discipline they were in, would be able to modify. And that was pretty important to us. We also tried to remove really field-specific terminology. We all know that your area has its own lingo that tends to be really siloed in academia. And again, it doesn't really serve necessarily the population of students that I tend to get well, because they may never have heard of these things. So something like APA format, there's this idea that somehow students have heard this when they're not taught that till they get to our major. Like, why would they know what that is? That's not something we teach in high school. It's not something we teach in the gen ed courses. But somewhere there's this assumption that they magically learn it or know it. And in her case, it's a different, pattern and different lingo, but we both really wanted to make sure that we were giving students the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know what these things were. And thus we provided kind of links and resources for them. We also really wanted to highlight the interconnectedness between mind and body for them, so that again, it fit well with her kinesiology and with my psych. And again, the overall or over-encompassing thing, I think would be critical thinking. Just kind of fostering this idea to really kind of put things together, question those connections, make connections between our class and other classes, and realize that kind of these things are connected. They're not, necessarily the way students sometimes think about it because they're in these classes, right, that are so specific.
Great.
So
Thank you.
that was our approach.
Thank you so much. And Barry, last.
Yeah. So my class is research intensive. And so one of the things I'm trying to emphasize is, finding the research and literacy with the research and so on. So the first assignment was scaffolded. The first assignment was just to search for a peer-reviewed article that had something to do with the environmental impact of language on mental health. And that was a really important step before we got to the next step, which is translate that piece into more vernacular language. But because I reviewed quite a bit of the ones that were submitted and realized that they were either very tangentially related to the question, or they misunderstood the paper, or something else, where I have to say, like, that doesn't really count. And also, again, I had to really get them to focus on, sometimes a paper would be about 80% not, 80% of it was not related to the question. And so having them really focus on what are the 20% of it says. You don't need to summarize the 80% if it's not relevant, right? So teaching them relevance, who's the audience for this, having them really think that through. And then the third part of the assignment was to really to have them read each other's translations and see if they could offer, and also read the papers they had selected to see if there was anything that the first student had missed, anything that could use more clarity, anything that needed correcting, and things like that, so that they could interact with each other's papers.
Thank you for sharing, Barry. So I've really appreciated listening to the thoughts and feedback and just your openness to sharing it. To end on a high note, full of positivity, we're going to turn it back to Shinta and ask her, with her experience of knowing student takeaway, student impact, if she could share some of the highlights she's heard through the years. And also, as she shares these highlights, to think about what advice would you give to other faculty interested in participating in this?
Great questions, Lily, and thank you for that. So this fellowship has been around for 8 years, and I have had an opportunity to hear from students across those 8 years about the impact of this fellowship. So I'll just share the 2 or 3 that come to mind. I remember many, many years ago, when we had an annual faculty student showcase in person, it was before the pandemic, a student had said to me that being a part of these assignments in her class changed her career trajectory. And so instead of whatever major she was originally in, she now wanted to go in this other major as a result of the fellowship assignments. I mean, we were not expecting something like that. And so our jaws just dropped to the floor with excitement. So that's one example. Another example, and this happens quite a bit, this is a very common theme. Students have said these fellowship assignments have changed their lifestyle. Like, there are assignments there that touch on the UN SDG of food insecurity and poverty. And so they've changed their lifestyle as far as the food consumption and their diets. There's one on the natural environment and taking care of our surroundings. And so with respect to recycling, they now recycle. I mean, there's just a lot of amazing things that happen because of these assignments. And so it's just been wonderful to hear directly from the students the impact of these assignments. And then to Lily's second question about what advice do I have, if any of you are part of UCF, if you're interested in this, please reach out to Lily and Rebecca, as they are on the leadership team of the fellowship. They are your institutional representatives. The leadership team, by the way, we meet monthly to talk about and continuing enhancing the experience for our faculty fellows, as well as for the students who become a part of this fellowship by way of the assignments. So if you're UCF, please reach out to Rebecca and Lily to see how you can get involved. If you're not from UCF, you're from another institution, you can also reach out to me as well, of course, to Rebecca and Lily too, and we can have a discussion about what would that look like if your institution wants to be an official member. There is no charge, by the way. I know that's one question a lot of people have is there a membership charge to be a part of this network? Absolutely not. In the spirit of open, it is free. We just want your passion. We want your commitment. We want your energy. We want your innovation. So please reach out if your institution wants to become involved in this fellowship. And I will also share one more thing. I know we're running out of time, but next week, as we close out Open Education Week, Montgomery College is hosting the fellowship's annual Faculty Student Showcase. So in this one, it's related to kind of what we're doing here, but some of the faculty fellows are bringing their students. So you'll be able to hear from the students themselves what their experience has been. So thank you, Lily and Rebecca.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shinta. And thank you, Barry, Devin, Martha, Sharon. This has been an excellent session. Really great to hear your experiences and your expertise. And now I know we're a few minutes over time. So speaking of hearing from students, our next session for Open Ed Live is a panel discussion with students. So if you are interested in attending that, please navigate to Whova and find it on the agenda. And we will see you there in just a couple minutes.